Good day, this is Shauna Casey, and welcome to this SOS educational webcast. The end is near. Preparing and checking your year-end list twice. Due to the large number of attendees, no conference call service is available for this webcast. The sound will broadcast through your computer speakers. However, if you wish to ask a question at any time during the presentation, please feel free to type it into the questions and answers panel of your go-to webcast console, and we will do our best to answer them at the end of the presentation. Any questions that we don't get a chance to address during the webcast, we will follow up with afterwards in an email. This morning we sent an email with a link to the presentation materials to everyone that registered as of 10 a.m. Pacific this morning. You can also find the link to the materials under the Event Resources tab on your go-to webcast console. This session will also be recorded, and we will send a link to the recording and materials in the next day or two. I hope that all of you are familiar with Stock and Option Solutions, or SOS as we are more commonly known. For those of you who are not, SOS is a leading stock administration, staffing, consulting, and outsourcing firm within the equity compensation marketplace. SOS provides interim and permanent placement, expert project resources, and total outsourcing solutions. To learn more, you can visit us online at www.sos-team.com or call us at 888-SOS-0199. Next, I'd like to introduce you to our speakers for today's session. We are pleased to have Donna Hammer and Madori Playford on the panel today. Donna's career in stock administration spans 20 years in the Silicon Valley. A CEP since 1995, she's held varied equity-related roles at Netscape, Ariba, Cadence Design Systems, VMware, and Cisco Systems, among others. Donna is currently the manager of stock at Yelp, which completed their IPO in March of 2012. Madori began her financial services career in 1999 at E-Trade. While there, she obtained her broker's licenses, was a founding member, then became the supervisor of the Customer Service Quality Assurance team. In 2004, Madori transferred to outsourcing, where she began her career in stock administration. Earlier this year, Madori became the manager of the Campbell outsourcing team for SOS. Madori has degrees in business and human resources, as well as a master's degree in management. She enjoys public speaking and has presented at various conferences and meetings, including NASP, E-Trade Directions, and the CEP Symposium. Next is our standard disclaimer slide. We'd like to remind you to consult your own advisors before making any changes. As I mentioned, the materials are available on our website, and here again is the link. Thank you all for joining us today, and with that, I'll turn this presentation over to Madori, who will introduce our topic and cover the agenda. Thank you.
Well, good morning, good afternoon, everyone. I'm so glad you could join us today. So today, as Shauna mentioned, we're going to be discussing year-end processes. And as we go through that, we're going to look at historical processes. What did we do in the past that can help us this year and into the future? What business partners have we worked with and will we be working with this year? Any vendors that we use? How do we help the employees through the year-end process? And then our conclusion. So let's first take a look at some of the historical processes. So the best way to get started for this year is let's go back and take a look at last year. What were those deliverables? Can we create a list of the reports that we ran last year and determine who we send those reports to? When are they needed? Not all reports are needed on the same date. We may also want to jot down a list of any vendors we used last year and decide, do we want to use those vendors again this year, especially if we're contracting out to a vendor, say, for 6039. And then what do the employees need this year? Are there any changes this year from last year? So we get started in making that list. So once we have that list created, we can use it as an outline for this year's checklist. We'll want to note any changes from the previous year. So for example, if we had one person in tax last year that needed a list of reports by a certain date, and that person's no longer with the company, well, what does the new person need? They may have a different list of requirements. They may have different due dates, so you'll want to follow up with that individual and determine their needs. And are there any new vendors? For example, maybe in previous years you did your own 6039 and printed out the 3921s and 3922 forms, whereas this year the company's grown to a point where you've decided to outsource that. And so now you're looking at potential vendors to help you with that process. And you want to consider any company changes that occurred during the year that are going to impact your employee statements or communications. Do you have new mobile employees that may be receiving tax information from 2 different countries that you need to take into consideration, or now are maybe under a hypo tax situation? Were there any mergers or acquisitions? Do you have employees that are going to need 3921s and 3922s from the previous company that you acquired and the current company now that the acquisition has been completed? Those are all things to think about and make notes on your checklist. Now we're going to look a little bit about how we create our deliverables for our business partners.
Hi everybody, this is Donna. I'm going to take over for a few minutes here in this section. So I'm going to talk through who those stakeholders are you're going to need to take into consideration when you're going through your year-end preparations. So the first group that we're going to talk about these 4 different groups. At a minimum, you're going to have to satisfy the needs of these 4 internal partners: tax, payroll, accounting, and HR. The first 3 are going to need information from you, while you need information from HR. All of us live in our own worlds, and nobody is really going to be fully appreciative or aware of your other responsibilities or deadlines. All they know about is their own requirements. So you have to manage both expectations and everyone else's schedule. Probably sounds familiar to a lot of you. We're going to start with the tax group. So, as with all of these groups, you should be proactive and schedule a meeting in early Q4 and make sure you send them the reports and the timeline from last year so they have a chance to look at it before you have the meeting. There's no need for them to be spending a lot of time in the meeting that you have set up looking at the reports from last year. Send them to them in advance so that you're not wasting your time at that meeting. And especially if there are new people on the tax team, as Madori mentioned, who may not have even been here for last year's year-end. As we all know, the tax rules change frequently, and they may have new or different requirements, and there may even be new ways to provide this information. Are you using share drives? Do you have secure folders in Box or some other external system where you need to be pushing the information to? Do you need permissions or access to be able to drop off this information? And finally, if you have multiple people that you're dealing with in the tax department or any department, you need to select a point person so that if you have questions, you're not sort of sending emails to some big group and somebody is making the decisions. Everyone needs to agree on deadlines in writing and have a process to update those if necessary. Sometimes using something like a Google Doc works well for this process if you want to have other people's input and have their availability to make changes to those dates in particular. Finally, if you utilize an external tax consultant to prepare tax returns for those expats that Madori mentioned or your globally mobile employees, you need to reach out to them as well during the same time frame in early Q4. Make sure that you get their deadline and the list of employees who they need information for so that you can provide this in a timely manner. Next, we're going to talk about your payroll group. Hopefully you've been working closely with your payroll department all year and have been doing quarterly audits. Everyone does that, right? Well, if you haven't done any audits yet, it's not too late. I'd suggest you reach out and at the very least do a year-to-date audit at the beginning of Q4 of all the transactions for equity that need to be reported to payroll, then do another audit at the end of November, so you only have 1 month of transactions to audit in January before the W-2s are run. Make sure that you're providing all reportable transactions to payroll, even if there's no tax element. And yes, you do need to report qualifying ESPP sales. Not everyone does that, still a requirement. As with your other partners, agree on a timeline that allows for corrections if needed. It's always easier to make adjustments now than to do W-2Cs later. Nobody likes W-2Cs. The next group is going to be, getting through my notes here. The next group is your accounting team. So accounting is going to need a ton of reports at year end, of course. When you meet with them, find out what their priorities are and what reports they want in what order. You may find that that group only needs some of the reports right away to do their journal entries and other bookings, and the rest of the disclosure reports can be done later so that you can focus on the other groups that you have to provide information for and not have too many overlapping deadlines. Find out who is responsible for, am I on the wrong slide here? Nope. Find out who is responsible for preparing the 1099s for directors and consultants. It may be somebody in AP or somebody else in accounting, and make sure that they have W-9s and everything else that is required to prepare those 1099s. 1099s is definitely one of those things that tends to kind of fall through the cracks a little bit, so want to make sure that you have the information for them in a timely manner. And then again, everybody needs to agree on what those deadlines are. And then the last group, as I mentioned, is HR. And they're the only department that actually provides information to you instead of the other way around. So it's especially important that you figure out who's going to be working on your deliverables and that they agree to the deadlines. It's probably not going to be the same person that you worked with last year. If your HR department's anything like mine, there's a lot of people moving around in there. I'm a little obsessed by addresses. I think they're one of the most critical data points in your stock platform. So if you aren't lucky enough to have automatic feeds updating addresses, to audit and make updates so tax statements and 6039 forms get delivered. Until we're able to send everything electronically, we need to make sure that snail mail still reaches its destination. This is also a good time to do a year-to-date audit of terminations if you aren't already doing them regularly. And with that, I am going to send it back over to Madori to go through the next section on vendors.
So in addition to our internal business partners, where we're flowing information back and forth in order to create the year-end process, we have our external partners that we work with. So our stock platform and what needs to be done with that. Is there anything that we need to either give to or receive from our transfer agents? And do we have 6039 consultants that we'll be working with for the current year? So our stock platform. And again, it's going to depend upon what platform you use and whether you're co-sourced, where you're doing all the driving, or outsourced, where someone else may be doing the driving and you're auditing. But things to take into consideration are, you know, we need to reset. We need to go back to zero on January 1st to start the new year. So resetting our year-to-date, our wages and supplemental income to zero, our year-to-date taxes paid to zero. Any tax percentages and their limits, have they changed? So it seems like Social Security changes every year, and California SDI likes to jump around a bit also. But also, if we have employees in other states, have those tax rates changed? So it's looking that up and making sure that our database is up to date. We need to make sure that ESPP and ISO dispositions are all fully entered, and any that are not entered, that we get those in the database so that we can provide those disqualifying and qualifying disposition reports to payroll for that last payroll run of the year. Maybe you're with a company that has an evergreen provision in your stock plans, so you get to add additional shares at the beginning of each year. It's time to check that plan, see how many shares you're going to be adding, and get that taken care of in the database. And SOX controls. You know, we work on SOX year-round. This may be the time of year when the SOX controls ask for the list of users for your, or access to your data and database, and you'll be providing that. Now, in some cases, this is done quarterly. In other companies, they may do that annually. So this could be something that you would be doing on a quarterly basis also. So the transfer agent, are there any year-end tasks that are required? For one thing I like to do is I like to reconcile the number of shares with the transfer agent with the number of shares in the stock database and make sure everything matches and ties. If it doesn't, then it's definitely time to find out why and try to get that reconciled. And we'll tend to download our data for our roll forward. So this is going to be the last roll forward of the year. Everybody's going to be looking at it, and you're going to want to have all of that data in there and reconciled. Were there any mergers and acquisitions that took place during the year? Do you have an escrow account or a paying agent that's separate from your transfer agent? Will they need to send out tax information to employees? You'll want to follow up with that paying agent to make sure that they are sending those out and possibly reviewing them for accuracy. So there's many different partners that we have to deal with during this year-end process. Finally is 6039. Are you going to outsource your 6039 reporting? If so, there's some things you'll want to go ahead and start taking action on that. This is the perfect time to start contracting that vendor and getting an updated statement of work for the year. That gives you plenty of time then to run that SOW through your legal department and get their blessing and sign off. You'll need time to generate the purchase order, so you'll have a new PO number for the process. And you'll want to get a list of deliverables and due dates from that vendor. Find out what they need and when they need it. That way you can prepare ahead of time and you're not feeling so rushed and like you're running up against a due date. You should always try to provide those deliverables. I prefer to provide them before the due dates, but certainly you're going to want to get them on the due dates, because if you deliver them late, you could run a chance of missing that January 31st deadline. Then you'll need to allow yourself time to audit those completed 3921s and 3922s. Make sure, which I don't think with most vendors today we have to worry about that, but we still want to take that on us and audit those forms to make sure that they are complete and accurate before they go out in the mail to the employees. And then finally, when everything is done and you've done your tick and tie, give that vendor final approval to mail out those completed forms. So now Donna's going to talk about the employee needs for year-end.
Thanks, Madori. Yeah, I'm going to focus on our favorite stakeholders, our employees. Focusing on our U.S. population for now. Going back to our deliverable that Madori was just talking about, our 6039 statements. At the very least, you'll have to provide those forms, one or both, 3921s and 3922s, depending on whether you have ISOs and or an ESPP, and tax summaries for all the different types of equity that you provide. While it isn't mandatory under the IRS rules, I always provide a cover memo that explains what they are receiving and why. There's a lot of confusion about these forms because essentially it's really for the IRS's benefit, and the employee can get the information that's on the 3921 and the 3922 from other places, so it's always confusing to the employee, what the heck am I supposed to do with this? The The IRS requires that those 6039 forms and tax summaries be delivered to recipients no later than January 31. Strangely enough, your requirement to file the forms with the IRS is later, either the end of February or the end of March, depending on how you're doing the filing. If you're doing using a provider for this service, as we discussed earlier, you'll need to make sure that you can provide all the information in a timely manner so that they can meet this deadline. If you're doing this yourself, again, make sure that you leave yourself enough time to make this deadline just in case something unforeseen happens. In prior years, there have been issues with just getting the correct forms from the IRS. They've been late pushing those out. You just never know what the universe is going to throw at you. You've got a lot going on, so leave yourself some room to breathe and be able to get those deadlines. It says on here that the 6039 statements must be mailed. A little caveat there, it is possible to send them electronically, but you need each recipient's consent to do so, which may or may not be something that's feasible for your company, either from a timing or a technology standpoint. Most companies continue to send these forms by mail, and many including Yelp, provide all the other materials in the same envelope, so at least everything arrives together. Hopefully there's a nice tax documents included, stamp on that envelope or something that'll make the employee at least, open it. You can send the memo and the statements either by email or make them available through some other means. If you have an intranet or a total rewards portal or something of that nature, you can provide those forms there as well. So still wrapping up here with our employee group, I do have a couple of suggestions for the year-end process. If you have a self-service address update portal like we do, I'd recommend sending out a reminder email in Q4 or some other mechanism where you're reminding your employees to update their mailing addresses if necessary. You can send this reminder with paychecks if you send out, paper paychecks or pay stubs, or if those are online, you can put a note on the main page of that portal if those employees are going to view that information online. We have a lot of employees who start with us who end up using one of our corporate addresses when they first come on board, and they just never get around to updating when they move out of those temporary housing. So it's not going to do anyone any good to have employee tax mailings come to corporate HQ. I don't think your receptionists are going to be super happy about that. So I like to send a targeted message to everyone in my database who has a corporate address and remind them that we need their real address. If they don't have one, that's okay. They could set up a P.O. box, I suppose, at the very least. But having hundreds and hundreds of forms, coming back to a corporate HQ office probably is not going to be the best process. We briefly touched on ISO and ESPP surveys kind of in passing earlier, so I'll just kind of touch on that here. If you do send out surveys, you may want to consider doing those quarterlies, but if you don't and you have to send them out for the year, make sure you send them out early enough to allow for responses to come back before all your reporting is due, because of course that's going to affect your W-2s to payroll, and they're going to have solid deadlines for that information to be provided to them. Madori, you want to just talk through this sample checklist real quick?
Sure. Now, this is a template that I actually found in Word for how to rent an apartment, but it was very easy to modify, and I like the way it lays out so that you can see exactly each item that you need to put on there. So I just did this mock checklist of items that would need to be delivered throughout the month of January. And, so that you can put your little check mark next to it as it's completed, leave it on your desk, and then when you make that last check mark, then at that point I would do my happy dance and be really glad that I survived that year end and that it's over with. So now we're going to go into our conclusion. Donna, do you have any points that you want to conclude with?
Yeah, so, just a couple of things. We sort of had gone through creating a list and laying out the form and, checking them off. And I find that to be exceedingly helpful. There's no way that you're going to be able to keep all of this in your head with all of the different deliverables and deadlines. But just kind of as an overview, you might think, all right, why are we talking about year-end planning in August? I'm barely back from my summer vacation here. Well, next week it'll be September, and that's nearly the beginning of Q4. So all of those recommendations about setting up meetings at the beginning of Q4, that's going to be here before you know it. So that's why we're kind of pushing this here. So it's not early. It's the perfect time, as Madori mentioned, to begin your planning process and to set up reaching out to all those other parties, even just figuring out who needs to be in those meetings is sometimes a little bit of a challenge. Finally, don't make assumptions. Don't assume that what you did last year is going to work this year. There may be new players in the mix, whether that's an executive or your boss or the VP of accounting or whoever that might be. And certainly there may be new systems to be considered. Are you using some kind of software or platform that you weren't using last year, or is accounting doing something different than they did last year? There could be different timelines and deadlines for any number of reasons. It's always better to ask and be told, yep, this is all good, we're good to go with this, do exactly what you did last year, than to spend a bunch of time preparing something that either isn't required anymore or isn't going to satisfy someone's needs. There's nothing worse than spending a ton of time creating something that either isn't needed or, again, that you have to do over. So better to ask ahead of time than to waste a bunch of everyone's time, most of all yours. Madori, you want to add anything to that?
Well, a little bit of a story here. So this was quite a few years ago, back before I thought I needed checklists, and I knew this process, and I could do it blindfolded. And went to update the database, and went to the ADP Fast Facts to pull out the New Year's tax rates. It wasn't there yet, so I thought, oh, okay, I'll just check on it in a few days. I forgot about it. About 6 weeks later, I realized that I haven't updated taxes in the database yet, and 6 weeks into a new year, there could have been all kinds of transactions. Fortunately, I was very, very lucky. There had only been a few exercises, and they were international, and I hadn't done my first release of the year, so I was able to go and get that and update the database. But that was certainly, I think, a very enlightening moment for me that, yes, I do need a checklist. Yes, I do need to pay attention to it and actually check things off as they occur. And if there's something that is causing a delay, then I need to be taking the time and looking at that checklist and checking that delayed item every single day until I can check it off. And if I need to reach out to a vendor, if the delay is caused by a vendor, or if I need to reach out to a business partner because I haven't gotten something that I need, then I need to be following up on a regular basis and getting that information and getting that checklist squared away. So, I don't think I can stress enough the value of preparing. As Donna mentioned, this year may not be the same as last year, but about the easiest way to find that out is to start out with what you did last year and then go to those business partners, both internal and external, find out what they need, what's going to be happening, what may be different. And another, I think, good tip to give is that if you've got a large group of partners, whether internal or external, that need things to be done by certain dates, try to make sure that you're staggering those dates. Don't let everybody want everything by the 5th of January. Really drill down on them. Do you absolutely need this by the 5th of January? When is your report due to your boss? Can we push this out? And try to stagger dates so that you're not on the 4th of January, you're not working until 4 o'clock in the morning trying to get these things done. So it brings in, communications. We have to be able to communicate with our business partners. We want to build those solid relationships. We do want to deliver complete and accurate data. We want to deliver it on time. But if we build strong relationships and we need a little bit of extra time, then we can maybe do those negotiations to get extra time and get the information that our business partners need and get it to them and complete our checklist and still finish our year-end tasks on time and with everybody happy at the end of the day. Donna, any little tips or tricks that you can think to help people?
Yeah, the only thing that I was going to add is that, obviously there are some things that you are just not going to be able to do until January 1. If you've got option exercises going on, through the end of the year, if you got an ESPP purchase on December 31, which I know a lot of people do, or December 30th, or whatever the last business day is of the year, there are just some things you are not going to be able to run until you get through the actual month of December. But there are a lot of things that you can do in advance, especially audits. I mentioned a couple of different times. If you've not done an audit with your payroll department for the information that you've provided to them throughout the year, you really need to get on that and make sure that they have actually entered everything into their payroll system so that their W-2 that they provide is going to actually match the tax statement that you're going to provide, and it's all going to tie back to the 1099 from the broker for those transactions that were done through that platform. So there are some things that you're going to be able to do in advance. Take advantage of those, and as Madori just said, you can't have everything due on the same day. A lot of those groups, tax and accounting especially, are going to tell you everything is due on the same day. I bet you that's probably not true. I know for a fact that, especially in the year-end process with the accounting team, that they really only need the stock-based comp expense stuff right away. And all the other reports that you need to run for the disclosures that go in the K, that stuff can wait probably a good week. Everyone has deadlines, but if you've got everything all on top of each other, you're not going to be able to do a good job, and you're not going to be able to satisfy everybody's requirements. So just push back a little bit and make sure that everybody sort of understands that there are a lot of different players that you're managing. And depending on the size of the company and the size of the transactions, the number of transactions for the year, you're going to have to sort of make everybody play nice and make sure that you've got enough time to process everything correctly.
Does anybody have any questions for us?
We're happy to take questions offline, or if you want to email either of us, happy to import any wisdom that we can provide or give you any further information on anything that we discussed here today.
Yes, by all means, if you want to reach out to me directly, my information is there on the presentation. Feel free to give me a call or shoot me an email. I'm more than happy to help in any way that I can. Okay, well, Shauna, I don't see any questions coming in.
Sure. Okay. I'd like to thank our speakers, Donna and Madori, today, who joined us. And thank you all for attending today's educational webcast. Please look for an email in the next couple of days with links to the recording and materials. Thank you so much, and have a great day. Bye-bye.